Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. The dust from the Arnold Classic weekend is just now beginning to settle, and honestly, there's a lot to unpack. This is unprecedented. If you don't know by now, Samson, Dowda, and Derek Lunsford went head-to-head at this event, and Derek actually prevailed, even though Samson is the actual Mr. Olympia right now. The last time we've even had a Mr. Olympia compete at the Arnold during their active reign was in 2001, when Ronnie Coleman was the Olympia heading into that event, and he actually ended up winning his only Arnold Classic title that year. But we've never had a reigning Mr. Olympia jump into the Arnold and be defeated. The closest thing to this happening was in 2002 when Gunter beat Ronnie at the GNC Show of Strength in a post-Olympia tour. But that was right after the Olympia, and it wasn't the second biggest show in the world. Ronnie just got beat at a regular pro show. Getting the dub at the Arnold Classic over a Mr. Olympia is a big deal, and again, unprecedented. But how did this happen? Derek was just third at the Olympia, not even second, and Samson won that event. But now Derek is back on top. In today's video, we're going to do a couple of things because we have a major crossover event here. I was going to do my normal show analysis, but I don't think that's going to cut it. And I wanted to do a progress report for Samson and Derek comparing their Olympia and Arnold versions so we can see who improved and who got worse. But instead of doing them separately, why don't we just combine them both? What we're going to do in this comparison is analyze every shot from the Arnold Classic and then go back and compare it to how these two compared at the Olympia. We'll be able to see how they changed individually and how that led to a different competition and ultimately how it led to completely different outcomes. We have a lot to get into for this video, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. We're starting with the front double, and right off the bat, you can kinda see why this was different than the Olympia. Derek's condition and polish allows him to completely outclass Samson, who was definitely off. Derek's polish isn't just limited to better condition either, it's also encompassing his posing. Samson's posing is a little jank here, mainly in regards to the midsection. That vacuum was not fully sucked in, and I don't think it was going to get better. His stomach was kind of an issue at this event. And you can see how that affects his waistline too. We'll compare this with the Olympia, of course, in a second, but you can already tell that his waistline and overall shape weren't as good this weekend. With Samson's shape faltering, Derek wins in that department too with his better lats, better vacuum, and much smaller waist. The difference is actually pretty vast. And in the arms, since they both suck in terms of separation, I'll just give Derek the nod here because he's at least bigger. And finally, for Derek's weak length, the legs, I actually have him beating Samson here because of his much better condition. This is still close though, because although Derek's legs were bigger at this event, they could still be even bigger, especially for that crazy upper half. But again, that's his weak link. It's close at a minimum, and he wins overall condition, overall shape, and the entire upper half as a whole. So with all of that, and with Samson being off, Derek starts off with an easy 2-point win on the front double. And yes, I will be using my regular margin of victory point system. 1 point for small wins, 2 for solid wins, 3 points for dominant wins. And I will have a scorecard for the Arnold and the Olympia, 2 separate scorecards so we can compare in depth. But let's take a look at the Olympia versions of these two gentlemen. Honestly, it's wild what a little less water and a tighter midsection can do for Samson. But also, while he gets a bit better, Derek loses a little bit of his polish here and a little leg size as well. With those changes, this pose is pretty much 50-50 now. I prefer Samson and the legs now on their own, and he definitely has the much better balance once again. His shape is also a lot better since his stomach is less full. I do like Derek's torso shape more still, but Samson definitely gets a pass here. He couldn't even do that at the Arnold. So Samson is better in terms of the top to bottom balance, winning the legs, and he keeps the shape a lot closer. With all these things being wins for him or being very close, I think the deciding factor is his size. At the Arnold, the deciding factor was Derek's polish, but here he doesn't really have it, at least not at that level. So I'm going with Samson here actually. Not as much as Derek won the first version by, Samson will just get 1 point here, but that's still a big flip. Samson's front lat spread from the Arnold is definitely better than his front double, and he also gets to take advantage of Derek having a pretty weak pose. Derek did improve this one a little, however, enough to stop the bleeding here, so to speak. Once again, he's very sharp through the legs, but Samson looks much better here than in the front double, enough to where I'm actually giving Samson the lower body now. But it's still close, which is a good thing for Derek because again, this is his weak link. Then through the abdomen, I gotta go with Derek. He's got the flatter stomach and the more defined core. That stomach on Samson is hidden a bit better here, but I still find it hurts the overall taper. It robs some of his lat presence because his shoulder to waist ratio is a bit thrown off. But Derek is still missing his lats here. I always miss them in this shot. As I said though, he is a bit better here, but he could still definitely open up more. Honestly though, because Samson isn't that good this time around, mainly because of the stomach, Derek is hanging in there with him in regards to the lats. Samson does clean up the rest of the upper body stuff though, the chest, delts, and arms. So as I said, Derek does kind of stop a lot of the bleeding, but Samson has the superior structure and that saves him in the lats too, but but barely. I have him winning, but Derek is actually forcing this to just a 1-point victory for his opponent. As I said, Derek's front lat spread is weak and it always has been, but it was closer at the Arnold because Samson dropped the ball. But at the Olympia, Samson was definitely in peak form while Derek was still floundering. Samson easily wins the legs here in that top to bottom balance again. He's also winning the lats now, and he maintains his victory in the chest, delts, and arms. Samson is able to build upon his margin here and expand it to 2 points on the Olympia scorecard. Let's go to the side chest, and honestly, this is crazy. I don't even need to dissect this one. Samson is way too overwhelming for Derek. I also don't like how Derek switched up his posing. He's very open with his arm placement, and I don't think that's a good move. It would be if he had a killer midsection and a bigger frame, but I preferred his Olympia execution, but we'll see that in a sec. Derek still does have good things on him. That side leg is in crazy condition, and he's more detailed throughout the upper body as well. But yeah, Samson is just dwarfing brother Derek here. And he doesn't completely drop the ball in conditioning, so it's an easy win. If Derek didn't have that crazy side leg and the better detail, this would be an easy 3-pointer for Samson. The Olympia version on the shot really does show us how much posing matters. The OG posing style from Derek really comes in clutch for him here. It doesn't win him the pose, but it pushes Samson back for sure. Derek wins the side leg again, but not by as much. But that's okay since he easily won last time. So even if he's a little worse here, it's still a win by a decent margin. But Derek's body is really what gets better here, and it's because of that posing. He's closing the arm up more, making it look thicker, and he's right there in the arm and delt with Samson. And in the pecs, it's the same deal. He's not spreading himself thin, and because of that, he looks very good in pec mass and detailed even compared to Samson, who probably has the best chest in the world right now. I'm going to say something crazy, but here at the Olympia, you could have almost given this shot to Derek. It will still be a win for Samson, but I'm knocking it down to just a point. And he wins because, again, that size advantage. But Derek looked very thick and very stout at the Olympia, even with a smaller frame, and he still had the detail advantage as well. Obviously, the rear double goes to Derek. Samson is continuing to improve his back show to show, but I highly doubt he'll ever be able to catch up to Derek. And with his crazy condition, Derek not only easily wins the back, but the lower half as well. By just as much, actually. Samson looks weeks out compared to brother Derek. Samson is pretty large though. Again, that size difference is crazy, and his back is pretty 3D. It's at least something, but this is still a dominant win by Derek. No explanation needed. What's crazy though is in a way, I could see the Olympia version as an even more dominant win than the Arnold version was for Derek. Yes, Derek's lower half was more shredded at the Arnold, but come on, he's still winning easily. Sure, Derek was a little less conditioned, but look what that did to his back. It was massive at the Arnold, but now he's even more 3D and even more thick while carrying the same amount of detail basically. He looks absolutely monstrous here. Samson definitely steps his game up overall with his Olympia package, and Derek is a little less sharp, but overall this is probably an even bigger win for Derek. Not so much that it becomes a 3-pointer, especially because Samson is more solid here, but that back on Derek is just so insane. So I'm going to do a 2-point win for both versions. The rear lat is another strong one for Derek. Now for this pose, you'll notice this is a screenshot of the stream. The reason I did this was to see these guys from my head-on angle because the width of the back is the most important thing here. First things first though, Derek has that lower half on lock yet again. It's just embarrassing for Samson. But that leaves us with the back, and you would expect that Samson would be too overwhelming for Derek as he was in other shots. But Derek's back is just so good. So good in fact that you can barely say Samson is wider. His width advantage is not dominant in the slightest. And then of course, Derek wins the other aspects like thickness and detail on top of winning the lower half. This gets a bit more narrow because Samson is bigger structurally and has the bigger back in the shot, but it's just not enough to break me away from yet another 2-pointer for Derek. Samson's lower body is just so lackluster, and sure he wins width, but barely, and loses everything else. Like the other back pulls, I see no reason to change the margin as we move to the Olympia versions. Derek still has a strong win in the lower body, and he wins the back too when you account for everything. Samson is definitely stronger here like he was in the last pose, at least in the back. The lower body looks smaller here for whatever reason, but the back is more 3D. He does change his posing on this shot a lot, but he needs to find something that works and stick with it. If he could do what he does in the lower body from the Arnold and combine it with his posing from the Olympia for his back, I think this could just be a 1-point win, but he's going to need some more density in the back and a much more shredded lower body as well. We have the side tricep next, and this is closer than the last side pose. Derek starts out by winning the side leg, but really it's not by that much. I know it's a crazy side leg, but Samson is just massive. In this shot, they actually both suffer from a midsection flaw. Samson is back to not being fully locked in. He got this very small issue under control at the last year's Olympia, but beforehand we would just see what you get now. The lower abs are protruding a little bit. It's not fully locked in. Derek is more locked in, however he still has his same issue of blurry lower abs. triceps. So they're both flawed in the main piece of the pose, and no, I don't think the most important piece of the side tricep is the tricep. It is in fact the midsection. But anyway, Samson does win the pecs. Derek can get away with looking thicker in the side chest pose, but here in the side tri where the posing opens the pecs and shoulders up, you can see Derek doesn't have that insane level of thickness nor density of Samson. Samson doesn't flatten out at all. Samson also has the bigger arm overall and wins the tricep, but Derek is more separated in his upper limb. Really, he's more separated and detailed overall, but he's getting seriously outmatched once again. But yet in another trade-off, he is the more streamlined individual up here. Derek was definitely worse for wear at the Olympia though. His midsection was even less tight than it was at the Arnold, and the same sogginess problem actually went all the way up to the pecs as well. Also on the side leg, while still great, it's just not as good as the Arnold version. Samson is now the one with a more streamlined pose. He's more locked in himself, and Derek is worse at the same time. And Samson still takes the same wins in the pecs, arm, and more specifically the tricep. Now for the score, I have Samson winning this version by a point. It's just not a very impressive pose to me, but Derek does have issues. And that margin doesn't change in regards to the Arnold version. It's neck and neck, but I would still give the edge to Samson for overall size, and he gets a 1-point win there as well. The abs and thighs is our next shot, and we don't have a winner here. Andrew Jacked was the only guy in the top 3 that can even pull off a half-decent shot. Between these two here, it's about who's less of a loser. Abs to abs, they're pretty much even. They don't even really have abs. This is some of the worst ab definition out of 2 Olympia champions ever. Phil Heath had better separation even with his bubble gut. And speaking of guts, Samson does have an additional problem in the midsection that Derek doesn't. They both don't have any abs, but Derek's waist is smaller and tighter, while Samson's waist is pretty round and bloated. Believe it or not, Derek's quads are actually what come in clutch for him here. We can debate about who sucks more in the upper half, but Samson has pretty much 0 cuts to the quads while Derek is diced. But they both have this twisting oblique shot to offer as well, but these aren't good shots either. The same problems exist. Samson may have slightly better abs, but he also has a certain turtle shell-like quality to his stomach, which undoes what he managed to do in those abs. And then he drops the ball in the quads again. So between both versions, somehow Derek pulls it off. He had the better legs and didn't have a gut while they both had pretty bad abs. So he squeaks by with a 1-point win. Again, he's not a winner, but less of a loser. The Olympia versions of these guys are still mediocre, but both guys are better. Samson has better ab definition here and a flatter, more trim midsection. However, he still has very empty looking quads. So even though Derek is notoriously off-putting in this shot, Samson leaves the door open and Derek tiptoes right past him. Once again, Derek wins the quads because he has actual definition, and in the abs portion, he is now actually flexing them properly. At the Arnold, he would just kind of tense the whole midsection instead of really crunching down on his abs, and I don't think that's the move. Yeah, crunching down makes his waist look wider, but at least now he actually brings out his abs. And since he does that, we can also count the vacuum as a little bonus. In between the abs and the vacuum, while also winning the legs in each variation, this will be another win for Derek. I still don't like both of them. Again, they're mediocre, so I'm not doing anything more than 1 point here in this pose, but at the same time, I will say this is a pretty conclusive win for Derek 9 times out of 10. I just can't overly reward his pose because it's still pretty bad. And finally, that brings us to the last pose of the comparison. I think the most muscular was winnable for Derek since Samson was off, the details were lacking, and that bloated stomach showed itself yet again. However, Derek changed his most muscular here, and that was a mistake. He was mainly opting for a hands-on hip position, and that does a couple of things. It flattens out his chest and also washes out some of the detail. The same thing kind of happens in the delts. We know Derek has very poor hardness and maturity through this region, so we should have just stayed with his older execution. The hands-on hips position also reveals the midsection when it really should be hidden. It's nothing special at all, and it hurts the pose more than it helps. He does win the legs here, but that's it. Even though Samson was off, he was still bigger and more detailed in the chest, delts, and arms. And sure, he has a bloated midsection, but Derek's midsection is hardly an upgrade. So it's basically a wash when it could have been just a weak point for Samson had Derek covered this up. Not only is Samson winning more body parts, but of course, he's just a much bigger guy. I don't like his pose on his own because of the stomach, but in a comparison to Derek, he definitely gets a small win. Like I said, the posing on this one makes a huge difference for Derek, but Samson does make some real improvements. So it's a close pose, but this time it's because both guys are very solid. Derek's legs look huge. Again, honestly, I have him over Samson here too. And now with this shot, Derek can hide his midsection, which is a good thing. He still has his upper abs showing, but that's all he should show. His chest is also looking thicker here because of the hand position, and he can wring out some detail here too. The same goes for his delts and arms. These areas really benefit from the better hand positioning. But Samson does make his improvements too. His midsection is a lot more locked in, and that really helps me like his pose more. The chest on him also looks fuller, probably because your eyes aren't drawn to a big belly, but he also has more details here. He also has a little more in the legs and abs as well. Samson does still retain that 1 point win with the Olympia version. However, I legitimately do think Derek is pushing him here, which is a pretty hot take. Next, we have the overall physique categories round. We're going to take a look at the whole physiques on 4 metrics: flaws, conditioning, muscularity, and shape. We'll start with the Arnold Classic versions and then talk about the Olympia versions after we've gone through all 4 categories. And let's first go to conditioning, as this is the most obvious category. If Samson had not slightly improved at finals, it would be no question that Derek gets a full 3 points here. In fact, I'm still contemplating if Samson's improvement at finals is even enough to do it. I will be conservative though and stay at 2 points for Derek. Samson will get a small get back though in the muscularity category. It's going to be close, however. Derek brought up his main weakness, the legs, and he's more developed on average between body parts. But then you had shots like the side chest where the size difference between these two was painfully obvious. Derek was more muscular pound for pound, he's a very stout individual, but Samson is just too big next to him. So he gets the category, but anything more than 1 point certainly wouldn't be correct. Next we have shape, and usually between Derek and Samson or anyone similar, I just make this a tie. When they're both on, they have great shape, some of the best in the open division after all. But Samson was not on in this case. His waist was wider and his stomach control was down. This was a contributing factor in Derek not only winning the front double, but the front lat spread being close. Derek was even more streamlined in the side shots. It's usually a tie in this category, but Derek is going to get the edge. But this also ties in with the last category, flaws. Not only was Samson's shape thrown off at this show, but the culprit of that, the stomach, was just an issue in and of itself. Derek does have nitpicks as always, and we all know them. But there was nothing on him as bad as Samson's gut at times. And yes, in some instances, it was a full-blown gut. Now, I don't want to overrepresent the stomach or any one particular flaw, but it will cost Samson 2 categories and a total of 2 points, which means Derek will receive 1 point wins in both of our last categories. For the Olympia versions, we'll stick with the same order, starting with condition. I think overall Derek had less of that polish, but he still runs so far ahead of Samson, which does say something about the gap in condition between these two. Because Samson was actually a little better at the Olympia, but I mean, Samson doesn't have shredded glutes, the most peeled hams, the most detailed lower back. He's more solid with this version, while Derek isn't, but it's still a tough loss for Samson. No change here. There isn't going to be a change in the muscularity category either. As we've seen the changes between these two, there really wasn't a massive increase or decrease with overall muscle size between either of these guys. There just wasn't any time for these guys to take big off seasons and make big improvements between these shows. The devil was in the details on this one, and with that said, the overall category of muscularity doesn't change. Derek's legs were smaller at the Olympia, but that doesn't really warrant a bigger margin for Samson. Derek was still more muscular pound for pound and more developed on average between every body part. What we do get changes in though are our last categories and flaws in shape. Samson was definitely too lax at the Arnold, but at the Olympia, his stomach was a lot more under control. That one change results in a flip in both categories. Well, not really a flip, as they'll both be ties. As I said in regards to their shape, both guys are great when they're on, and they're so good that it purely comes down to preference. So it's up to you in the comments to decide. I'm leaving it blank. And when Samson has a glaring flaw like the gut taken out of the equation, then they're then on even ground. Yes, they both have small issues, but they're pretty much even in that regard, so the flaws category will also be a tie. Alright, that's the comparison, but we have a few questions to ask ourselves. What were the changes from the Olympia to the Arnold, and how did those changes translate into a Derek loss, a 3rd place finish actually, into a Derek win? Well, first things first, let's take a look at the final scores. Let's start with the Arnold score because that's the most important thing here. What did I think of this Arnold Classic? Well, I thought it was a healthy competition, but still a healthy margin of victory for Derek. I had him winning 65.5 points to Samson's 34.5. This was still close, as you can see on the scorecard here, but it was even closer at the Olympia. What's really interesting though is that on the final scores for the Olympia, Derek actually still won with 52.6 points to Samson's 47.4. I'm not trying to complicate this video more than it already is, and I will address this in just a minute, but for now let's talk about the changes. Derek's score went up 13 points from the Olympia to the Arnold, so there was an improvement, which was the consensus from the crowd, online fans, even the head judge. But that's not a massive difference, and you wouldn't expect it to be. There wasn't any time for long off seasons and to push the size and improve body parts, that type of thing. But what happened were the small wins and failures made up a noticeable difference. We all know this current era of bodybuilding is very competitive. We may not agree that it's better or worse than the 90s or whatever, but we can agree that the top guys and a lot of others are still running on very even ground. This is especially true at the top. We are in an era with a dominant force like Ronnie or Phil. Even though Samson might be the strongest Mr. Olympia in years, it's still a pretty open contest. So suffice it to say, when you have 5 guys that can win the Olympia on any given day as long as they're on, it's a game of inches now, and a little matters a lot. For Derek, most of the changes he made from the Olympia to the Arnold were all positive. The 2 major improvements were his leg size, but his conditioning was also very improved, even better than normal. He did miss a little fullness in the back and in some other areas, and I don't like his posing choices, but this was a better overall package compared to last Olympia. On the other hand, I can't really say anything positive about Samson. It's not like he was completely off and destroyed his career, that's not at all what I'm saying. But he didn't improve anything of note, and instead he took small steps back in conditioning and stomach control. gold. But all in all, these were small things. Derek already comes in to show more condition than Samson, and Samson won the Olympia with the worst condition out of the top 3. How did these changes affect the actual competition so much that we now have Derek ahead of Samson? Well, let's talk a little bit about what we saw at the Olympia. Yes, I did technically have Derek winning on the scorecard, but I am fine with Samson winning. I was then and I am now. Derek had high highs and low lows at that show, but Samson was more well-rounded. I see an argument for both. Although Hottie would have probably been a good middle ground choice, but I digress. The judges seemingly wanted to set a new standard, and Samson did good enough, and I do see the vision. I would say between Derek and Samson it's about 50-50, though 2024 Derek is definitely underrated. The thing is though, while the judges want a guy like Samson, a well-rounded, shapely guy, you gotta bring the goods too. You have to check the bodybuilding boxes, not just the aesthetic box. And he was big at the Olympia, but his condition was just good enough, while Derek and Hottie were both off at the same time. What I'm trying to say is that Samson won with what I would call his minimum conditioning requirement. If he would have shown up in a less conditioned state, or if Derek or Hottie showed up even better, Samson would have been passed up. Samson is pretty much in control of his own destiny. If he shows up in condition and makes little improvements here and there, with the judges wanting his look, he can win pretty much anything right now. His only competition when he's on would be an on Andrew Jacked, until someone else emerges. But at the 2025 Arnold Classic, he was caught lacking. Derek got better while at the same time Samson failed at the one thing he needed to have: decent condition. And with that, the small gap was closed. Sure, Samson got better at finals, but it wasn't enough. Derek was on both nights while being improved, and I would actually say he was just better on both nights straight up. At this level, and this era, if you give an inch, even if you're the strongest Mr. Olympia champion in years, that inch quickly turns into a mile and you're getting left in the dust. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. What did you guys think of this year's Arnold Classic Top 2? But perhaps more importantly, what does this mean going forward? Is Derek the front runner now for the Olympia? And really, by how much is any one person the front runner in this modern era? Let me know your thoughts and predictions down in the comments below. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more. If you want to support my channel even further and are in need of some high quality supplementation, consider purchasing from Arms Race Nutrition. If you do, use code Project10 at checkout for 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexi, yeah.